Welcome to the Debrief Podcast with Matthew Stephen Brown. On this show, Pastor Matt sits down with his friends to answer your questions about life, Jesus, and the Bible. Let's get into the episode.
Hey, welcome back to the Debrief Podcast. I'm Donna Martin, and I'm here with Pastor Matthew Stephen Brown. How are you?
I am excited. A little nervous about these questions, but
yeah, these are interesting, and I'm excited to hear your take on these. And these are topics that sometimes Christians don't talk about. These are things that maybe traditionally there have been some discussion, but we don't really know.
I know.
What's growing?
I grew up in church for 20 years. I never heard about this stuff.
Yeah, so. Exactly. All right, so we're going to jump right in. This is Chris from Redlands, California. And he says, what is your understanding of the Nephilim? My understanding was that they were fallen angels that had sex with humans, which produced a race of giants, for example, Goliath and the descendants of Rapha. It's confusing when it says in Genesis 6:4, when sons of God went to the daughters of man and had children with them. They were heroes of old, men of renown. Heroes, ? In my example above, they are the enemies of David.
Right. And so Chris, welcome to just endless debate and speculation. And so there are two main thoughts, and these aren't the only ideas on the Nephilim, but there's two main thoughts. So one thought is the more practical thought, and we'll start with that first. So Adam and Eve have two sons. So they have Cain and Abel, and Cain kills Abel, and then Cain is banished.
Yeah.
And so then they have Seth, the righteous line of God. And so some think that this is Seth's line having sex with Cain's line. So that the sons of God had sex with the sons of men. So that's one thought. There are some days where I think, that's probably true. And then there's this other thought, which is the more mystical approach, which is your thought, Chris, which is that these are somehow fallen angels. And an angel may not be the right word, but fallen ones, like we talked about in the last episode, the seraphim, these snakes, these angelic beings. I'd rather use that than angels, because angel is messenger of God. And so these are fallen beings, creatures from heaven who have rebelled against God, like the snake in the Garden of Eden. And this is the story of them now acting out on their rebellion. And so the sons of God, these mystical creatures of heaven, whatever they are, having sex with women on earth. And so it's really important here that we understand that sex is something that's very, very powerful and that God cares deeply about. That sex is given to men and women for a procreative purpose and for becoming one with each other. But this sin, if Chris's interpretation is correct, is a becoming one with a God-like creature. So it's an unhealthy image that's against the creative story.
Yeah.
So just as the snake is an uninvited third party in Genesis 3, these sons of God are an uninvited group of creatures, beings. We don't know exactly what they are. I just don't like the term angel, because that means messenger. And so they're not carrying out a message from God, but they're carrying out their own purpose, and they lust after. They see that women are beautiful, and which women are beautiful, you're beautiful.
Thank you.
So they have sex with them, and that product leads to an abomination, something that is unhealthy and unholy, and so and giant.
And giant.
Yes, so very, very large. And so we see this throughout Scripture, this these giants. The issue is here, Chris, so you say heroes. And so what I think, again, oftentimes, the Hebrew will use a word that's positive, but we are to interpret it in a negative light. So oftentimes in our English translations of Genesis 3, it will say the serpent was crafty. Well, what it means is wise, shrewd. Shrewd can be positive or negative. Like I can be a shrewd businessman and do well, or I can be a shrewd businessman and rip you off.
Right.
And so oftentimes it will present an adjective to us that's neutral, and we are to imply the meaning. And so heroes, what I would say is not necessarily, men of renown. These are super important people, and they came about from, an unhealthy union and produced these giants that are huge problems. And so this helps us then understand why God had to judge the earth, because we have these abominations running around, these giants, and they're just awful. And it says in the Bible that God saw that the intentions of man's heart was completely evil.
Yeah,
Every
totally.
thought was evil, with the exception of Noah. Noah was a righteous man. And so God chooses Noah, saves Noah, and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. So then the question becomes, if they're giants and God drowned them all,
right?
how on earth do we have giants again? Well, there's one of two thoughts. One thought is that Ham's wife is a descendant of this unhealthy gene pool.
Yeah.
And so even though God is judging the world and saving Noah and his family, they unsuspectingly, and again, so how does sin come into the world? In Genesis 3, through a woman. What may have happened in Genesis chapter 6 through Ham's wife? We don't know this. I'm just speculating. They could have come on, and then he rebels against God, by choosing to see Noah naked. And there's more going on there.
Yeah.
It's not just he took a peek.
Right.
There's something happening there. And in Jewish culture, Canaanites are kind of the father of homosexuality. Like, so in Canaan, homosexuality is practiced. It's a part of their worship. And whenever the Jewish people got mixed up in that, they bring the Asherah pole, the penis into the temple, and they have gay sex in the temple of God. God grabs Ezekiel by the hair and says, they think I can't see. He says, I see this and I'm going to judge them. So that could be that. Another thing is what happened in Genesis 6 just happens again.
Yeah.
So, the angels are destroyed, but they do it again and they produce this again. And so again, there's this war, Chris, that in the last episode we talked about that we don't fully understand. There's a spiritual world that's a fog. It's powers, principalities, and what do we say? Authorities of the unseen realm. So there's a realm that we can't see and we don't understand. And there's a war that's going on that started in Genesis 3 with a heavenly creature. It gets worse in Genesis chapter 6 with the sons of God having sex with the sons of women. And then that offspring again, and a lot of people miss this, happens with the Tower of Babel with Nimrod. He's a man of renown. He's a descendant of this unhealthy alliance. And so we see this, and Jesus is going to attack all three of those things. Jesus is going to take down the snake. Jesus is going to deal with the demons. And so a lot of people believe that the demons are the eternal spirits that have been cast down from heaven that did this with women. And so their bodies drowned in the flood, but they're eternal beings. And so they're still here. And that's manifested to us in Legion when Jesus goes across. Who are you?
Yeah.
We're the army that's against you. That's what it means. We are all that stands against you. And then they beg, please don't kill us. Send us into the pigs. And that's important. Send us into that which is unclean because that's where they're most at home. And Jesus sends them out. And then, of course, and for everybody listening, last episode, why is witchcraft so deadly? Why is the occult so deadly? Because what happens to the pigs? The same thing that will happen to you. The Son of God died for you. If you follow the sons of God, this unhealthy alliance from Genesis 6, they will kill you. And it's completely different. So the unique Son of God dies for you. These sons of God, these fallen ones, they'll kill you. It's completely different. And it goes back to the lie. You won't die.
Right.
You will understand and know what God knows. And so, but they do die. So then, Jesus is attacking these things and dealing with these things. But it's very, very difficult. And a lot of people disagree and argue about this. But Nephal, to fall, the fallen ones, that's where it comes from. We don't know exactly. We just know that what happens in Genesis chapter 6 is pretty ugly. It's an ancient text. We're trying to put the pieces back together. But God is fighting a holy war against demons that can inhabit people. So in Numbers, when they try to go to the promised land, remember the 10 spies say, we can't take it. Why?
Yeah, because we look like grasshoppers.
We look like
They're
grasshoppers
huge.
because they're giants.
Yeah.
So it's the descendants of all that's unholy. So remember, there's three things. Joshua is now going to kill the descendants of this rebellion. So however they are, his war is against these giants. And he begins to kill them in the promised land. Then we have King David. God's chosen one. Who does he have to fight?
Yeah, Goliath.
Goliath, the giant, and his brother.
And his brother. Mm-hmm.
Then Christ dies on the cross at Golgotha, which is most likely the place where Goliath's head is buried. It's the place of the skull.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of Christians miss that. What skull? Goliath's skull. Now, that's a stretch there. I could be wrong, but Golgotha, Goliath, very, very close. And so, and we know that David takes the head to Jerusalem and buries it.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this, and then we go back to Genesis 3, right? He will strike your heel, and he, Jesus, in Genesis 3, will crush your head.
Mm-hmm.
Where is Christ crucified? At the head of the giant.
Mm-hmm.
He's actually crushing Satan's head there.
Mm-hmm.
And the last giant is defeated. And so it's this war. And I actually want to do a deep dive into this, Chris.
It's great.
Because there's a whole lot more, and some people are freaking out. My daughter texted me this week. She said, Dad, what's the book of Enoch? I've never heard of this. And I'm like, okay. So we can dive into this. But here's the thing is, we can't know fully, but we can know partially. And we have to be very, very careful. The spiritual world is real.
Yeah.
Demons are real. They probably come from this. The book of Enoch indicates that that's where they come from, that they're the remaining spirits here on earth that have been banished. But it gets confusing. There's some demons that are in prison. There are some that are not. And so it gets very, very confusing. And you can Google that and people are going to spell it all out and they got it all figured out. And maybe, but maybe not. So Genesis chapter 6, two interpretations. One is the line of Seth and the line of Cain, which is the easiest interpretation. But I think very clearly there's more going on here. And, Genesis 3, 6, and 11 just show the realm of sin getting bigger and bigger no matter what God does. So in Genesis 3, they sin, they're kicked out. It gets worse.
Mm-hmm.
So things aren't better. Their own son kills the next one. Genesis chapter 6, the sons of God have sex with the sons of women, and it just pollutes the human DNA pool.
Mm-hmm.
It makes things worse. Then Genesis chapter 11, the sons of God, Nimrod, you know what? We don't need God to come down to us. We can go up to him.
Mm-hmm.
And so he builds Babel to erect a connection and reestablish, right? And it's a rebellion. Not only are we going to rebel, but we're going to go back to the throne.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't go there, baby. You can't go. And God destroys it. And he confuses the languages and he spreads it out. But these giants keep popping up and they keep coming up. And so we see it with Joshua and Moses. We see it with David.
Mm-hmm.
And so really your whole life is killing these unhealthy, unholy giants in your life so that you can become like Christ. And Christ has given us the victory in that. And we got to trust that. But Chris, that was a great question.
Great
and so
explanation.
if people are driving and their jaw just dropped.
I know. Now everybody's Googling
welcome
Nephilim.
to the Bible.
It's awesome. All right. I love that. Okay. So this is Viviana from Riverside, California. I just finished reading 1 Samuel and getting into 2 Samuel and was curious on getting more context in David and Jonathan's friendship. Given the cultural climate we're in, how am I able to defend this friendship from others claiming it's homosexual and used as an affirming passage for the LGBTQ community and Christianity?
Right. So Viviana, I'm going to give you every affirming Bible verse for the LGBTQ plus community right now in the whole Bible. I'm going to give you every single one. Are you ready?
Ready.
That's it.
I
gave everyone to you. So it doesn't exist. So what happens is, and this is really a problem, is this idea that men can't truly love each other without wanting to have sex with each other. And so that's the problem. And so I would say there's nothing in the text to indicate that David loved Jonathan in a sexual way, and there's nothing in the text to indicate that Jonathan loved David in a sexual way. What they're doing is they're reading back into that, trying to see something that's a current problem for us today. And what's condemned in the Bible is not love between two men. It's not friendship between two men. What's condemned is the sex act.
Yeah.
And again, why? It goes against the created order. So what does Satan say? No. Did God really say that?
Mm-hmm.
And so he's questioning. And what Satan is doing is he causes us to rebel against the creative order. And what he's saying is your friendship is so good, it's so pure, it's so amazing. Why wouldn't it be sexual?
Mm-hmm.
And what we need to say is because that goes against the created order. And so to be very, very blunt, men have penises and women have vaginas, and they have roles. And those roles are both for urination and for procreation.
Yeah.
and they fit perfectly together. So we know anatomically, anatomically, there we go. Anatomically, we know what we're supposed to do with these things. Our bodies tell us what we're supposed to do with these things. Our desires tell us something else. Our desires say they go somewhere else. And, we need to think about that. And, I think about, so many heterosexual men, they never think about, their sperm and where it goes. They just think about their desires. And there's just, I can't tell you how many times I've prayed with men in our church that don't have two sperm to rub together. And they would die to have that. And men are just spreading their seed everywhere, not thinking about it. Sorry, I know two sperm. They don't have it. And it's becoming a bigger and bigger problem. Men are becoming super infertile. Some of it's from, I think just naturally it happens in occurrence, but I think steroids is a big part. Yeah. I think our diet. All these chemicals that we're putting in our food, I believe are affecting our fertility and our sexuality.
Absolutely.
We know from science that when they spray some of this stuff on waters with frogs turn from boys to girls. They change. Their sex changes. They know this.
Wow.
When they spray this on these toads. It's a huge, huge problem. And so, these chemicals I think are affecting it's the only way I can go from, okay, well, in the 1980s, I knew no one was gay, LGBTQ+. My son just went to Denver last week. He's like, Dad, everybody's gay.
Yeah.
I mean, how do we go from no one to everyone?
Right.
And this is something even, liberal commentators, is it Bill Maher? Bill Maher has said, he's like, by 2050, we're all going to be gay because it keeps doubling.
Right.
And so something is going on here. And so we just need to say, no. The creative order, God's purpose for me as a man is to be married. If I choose to have sex, to be married with my wife and to raise children. And part of the raising of that children is to stay married and work it out. I was listening to a Jewish rabbi this week. I follow him on TikTok, and I love listening to him. It's such a great perspective. But he said something that made my jaw drop, and the question was on divorce. And he said this. He said, no, divorce is a commandment of the Torah. And my jaw dropped. He said, it's one of the 613 commandments. And I just went, because as a Christian, we have Jesus.
Right.
And so what Jesus says is, no. Moses gave that law to you because of the hardness of your hearts. Yeah. But listening to a rabbi, just go, no, it's a commandment. Now, he did pivot and say, look, it's terrible. Sure. And there's a right way to do it.
Right.
But you shouldn't do it. And so, but it was just hearing that language and just, how important Jesus is in that. And so the idea is, right, sex between two people. And here's what Jesus says: since the Lord has put them together, let no man tear apart. No one is to tear apart the created order that God has set, that God has ordained. And part of that teaching for people to say, well, Jesus never spoke on it. He is speaking on it right there.
Yeah.
He's aware of homosexuality. Homosexuality is practiced. It's not condoned in Judaism. It's not until the church becomes more Greek than Jewish that it's an overwhelming problem. And that's why right in the letter to Romans, it's in the first chapter of Romans. Paul's like, hey guys, just so you know, this is not a part of God's creative order, because Gentiles didn't know that. So,
I also feel like the story of David is so descriptive and intense. If it was that, God would have said, you know what I'm saying? Like he's killing folks. He's got 40 million wives. I mean, if there was something that was going on in this relationship, of all the stories in the Bible, I feel like we would know from
they
David's
didn't sweep stuff under the rug.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, Melody's sermon last week.
Yeah.
Oh my Lord. Like I didn't know what she was preaching on. I sat down. I was like, oh Lord, here we go. Because I know that story. And it's a really, really difficult story. Yeah. It's incest, it's rape. And then it's what happens to a lot of victims of sexual abuse. The parents do nothing about it.
Right.
I mean, David
For their
was
own shame.
a man after God's own heart, but he's a terrible father.
Yeah.
Terrible. And he had sex, and he did a lot of things he wasn't supposed to do. And so, the Torah commands kings not to have many wives. Both he and Solomon violated that. So
Solomon took it to the next level.
I know.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I just, when I read this, I'm like, I think you're right. Us trying to interpret, we have to be careful not to interpret the Bible through our own cultural context and like try to impose on it. And I think this is what's so hard with young people right now, and just this constant bombardment of like, choose your sexuality, choose what you're going to do. Are you gay? Like, when I was in high school, nobody asked you.
Yeah, no.
You didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
Nobody said, well, which one are you choosing? That wasn't even a question. We knew a couple of gay people.
Yeah.
And that was fine. We knew who they were, but there was no one presented you with this. Are you gay or straight, or are you trans or whatever?
Yeah.
And I think because the culture is so perverted and so, has twisted so much, what would have been what I do with my best friend, hold hands with my best friend 20 years ago, is now like, oh, now that's your girlfriend. And it's like, no, she's pretty. That's my best friend. And it's fine for us to have this relationship, and it's not sexual.
Right.
And I think our culture has done such an injustice to kids where they're feeling like they're having to choose, and even things that would be innocent, like a close friendship relationship with Jonathan and David is now, well, it's sexual. It's
right.
not.
And there's just no evidence to suggest that at all. It's just mere speculation. And what I would say is it's actually worse. It's slander against their friendship. It's saying it's making something sexual that's not sexual. And that's what our culture is doing, is we've made everything sexual, including childhood. It's
Absolutely.
just it's so wrong. And, we just cannot see that in there. And so, that's the problem with a lot of that doctrine. I've wrestled with this, because I want to know what God's word says. I have gay people that I love that matter so much to me. And I want to make sure that I'm understanding the text right. I probably haven't studied, Viviana, an issue more in the Bible than this. Probably need to study the Nephilim a little more. But when it comes to this, I mean, I've read tediously, boring, instructive, fall asleep, wake yourself up again, books on this, and it's just not true. And so even oftentimes, there was a big to-do because a professor at Fullerton said that the gay community are the new Gentiles that we have to open our doors to. And so everybody was praising this, and I said, okay, and I went and read the article, and he literally said, to be clear, this is not taught in Scripture. He said, but I believe this is what he said. This is an evolution of our faith.
Oh, okay.
But because I'm like, okay, what does he know that I haven't seen? And he said, to be clear. And so what a lot of gay people say is the same thing, is that in Revelation, what they're condemning is two things: men having sex with boys and forced sex with slaves. And to be clear, in Genesis 1, that is not what Paul is condemning. It is men having sex with men and women having sex with women. And there's no hint of forced or whatever, which I'm not saying that didn't happen. I mean, when you were a slave, you had to do what a slave did. Right. And it was terrible. You didn't have, rights over your body. How do they say it? They didn't have autonomy or not autonomy. They didn't have, I can't think of the word. The abortion side uses all the time. I have agency. Slaves did not have agency over their bodies. And so I imagine a lot of slaves sitting in the first century church hearing these teachings were like, okay, I don't know exactly what I'm going to do, because I don't know that my owner is going to be like, yeah, we don't do this anymore. So, that's a challenging thing. So what I would say is, it's just not in the text. It's just not.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. This is Jennifer from Corona, California. In Revelation 21:1, it says there will be a new earth and a new heaven. Who is going to be living on the new earth or the new heaven?
Yeah, well, JWs tell you if the 144,000 need to live in heaven. So if you don't know what JW is,
past that number.
Jehovah's Witness, So it's real unfortunate, because that was their big push when they first started, is you want to be in the 144. And here's what I would say is, you don't want to be in heaven. You want to be on the new earth. So heaven is for celestial beings and God.
Yeah.
Earth is for you and I. And, you are not meant to be a disembodied spirit. There's this really, really strange passage in the book of Revelation where those who have been murdered and lost their heads say how long before we get the resurrection, and the Lord gives them a special covering, because we are not made to live as disembodied spirits. And so that's just not how we were made. We were made to have bodies. And so, oftentimes when we think of our loved ones in heaven, they don't have a body. They're waiting for their resurrected body. So on the new heaven and the new earth. And so we need to understand this. So within the counsel of God, right, Satan fell. And so a lot of people, they want to know the story of Satan falling. You know what I think? I think Genesis 3 is the story.
Yeah.
I think it's the story of man and Satan falling at the same time.
Wow.
I can't prove that, but I think that is his fall. that he is cast to the ground. So when Jesus said, I saw Satan fall, like, stars from heaven, I think Genesis 3 is his story. It's not just our story.
Wow.
It's his story. And so of believing his own deception, he is the deceiver. He is the accuser. So we need a new heaven, a new earth. Man, I learned something this week in the Greek language. So does anybody speak Spanish in here? Do you speak Spanish? So in Spanish, the devil is diablos or diablo. So that comes to us from the Greek word for the devil. Do you want to know what the root word for gossip is? Oftentimes in the New Testament, we're deviling when we're gossiping.
Wow.
So not only is the devil in the world, but he's in us when we slander each other and we talk about each other. Isn't that scary?
Yeah. Yes.
That the word that Paul chooses to use in the Greek for gossip, he borrows from deviling.
Yeah.
Like that is just really scary to think about what can happen. So we want a new heaven, a new earth. So we got to go back to Genesis 3. And I know this is confusing. So, we got to go back to Genesis 1. So God, it says, Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Then there's all kinds of different theories between what happens Genesis 1, Genesis 2. I hold to a gap theory that there's a period of time. And I think that Genesis 1 is in the beginning, whenever that was, God created it. And then God allowed things to get right. So we think about how long, we're waiting. We went out to dinner with Madison last night. So we're 33 weeks. I say we. I don't have a baby in me. But it feels so long. I'm like, come on, get here already. I want to hold you. I want to see you. I want to love you. I want to change you. I want to smell you, and it feels so long. But God is taking 10 months, not 9 months. Single guys need to know this. 10 months to prepare us for him. He needs 10 months. And so when God created things, I think there's an evolutionary process that science has rightly identified that prepared it to get ready for us. And then God comes over in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, over the darkness of the earth. And so, there's water. So think about that. There's water over the deep and there's chaos and it's wild. So when people say, where were the dinosaurs? Yeah. Probably right there. It was not, you and I don't want to be ducking a T-Rex, you know what I'm saying? So it was not suitable for man. And so then God creates this safe place. Now, everybody listen, this safe place between heaven and earth, and it's called Eden. Now, later, we'll call it the temple or the tabernacle. It's this unique place that is a transportal. Now, think about that, between heaven and earth. And that's what Eden is. It's the place where God comes and walks amongst us. It's very, very cool. So then Jesus, comes to earth because the temple is about ready to be destroyed. So there's no Eden, there's no tabernacle, there's no temple. Jesus is killed. And then we become the temple. We are Eden. We are the tabernacle. The Holy Spirit dwells inside of us. And so again, back to the homosexuality piece. If you're a Christian, you are set apart by God for his holy purpose. I had this conversation with my son. He's 21 years old. He's a good kid. He's never done anything that normal 21-year-old boys don't do. But I said, you have to ask yourself, are you called to be normal or supernatural? Yeah. And every Christian has to wrestle with this because when we compare ourselves with everyday people. Well, are you called to be an everyday person? Or are you called to be a set apart person of God? Something for holy use. And if you are, then you don't do with your body as you will because your body is not your own. And Paul tells us this in 1 Corinthians to a church who thought they could do what they wanted with their bodies. And Paul says, no. Don't you know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit? And we need to think about that. So what are we waiting for? Right now, there's a part of me, that's the temple and I connect with God. But there's going to be a time where all of me connects with God. And that's in the new heaven and the new earth. And so here's the thing. The entire earth will be connected within the entire heaven. And there won't be a place anymore, but they both will be fully connected, fully embraced, and fully one in some way where God is with us. And so what we see in Revelation is we see a city descending from heaven.
It's cool.
And where does it land? On earth. And there's no daylight, there's no nighttime, It's this beautiful, beautiful place. And so Christians will rule and reign with Jesus on the new earth that is no longer chaotic. It's no longer under rebellion. It is firmly and safely and forever under the rule, reign of God. And then there's some weird stuff in Revelation that we got to figure out where the devil's released for a period of
couple
time.
times.
Yeah. So
unlocked, he comes out the pit. And
yeah.
He's running around
and there
for
are
a couple
very
years.
few Christians that agree on anything on that. And so again, the book of Revelation is a very, very difficult thing to write because again, it's written in code to protect Christians.
Yeah.
And I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago that, a lot of Christians have completely missed the fact that the tribulation is 7 years and that the attack on Jerusalem took 7 years.
Yeah.
And so they're missing that. And John is trying to write about this war that's taking place, and it feels like the church is losing because the armies of Rome are coming in and everything is against us. And yet what happens? The church escapes.
Yeah.
The church thrives and the church wins, and we will rule and we will reign. It's not the Roman Empire that's going to reign for 1,000 years. It's Jesus. He's going to reign for 1,000 years. And then ultimately, right, there's going to be this huge final battle of Gog and Magog and all these things. And to last week's question, that's probably the Nephilim, the final battle.
More
more of
giants.
them. And it's the final crushing and destruction of them where they are all cast into the bottomless pit. And then it's over and then it's good. So Jennifer, it's a great question, but many Christians miss this. They think heaven is the goal. No. The new earth is the goal.
Yeah.
The new earth is the goal. And I was driving around Riverside today and I'm so frustrated that they don't have people pick up trash anymore. So when I was a kid, if you got drunk driving or you got a ticket or whatever, you worked on the weekends picking up trash. And I don't know how we lost that, but there's just garbage everywhere and it drives me crazy. And so Tammy and I live on a busy street. So every morning I get up and I'm picking up somebody's Del Taco wrapper or somebody's Big Gulp drink. And it's just, they're literally throwing garbage on my home.
Yeah.
And that's the way the world is. And we have a beautiful house and I love my home, but there's just garbage constantly. There's going to be a day where there's no garbage anymore. It's just clean and it's beautiful and it's perfect. And I can't wait to live on that new earth. Because if you think about it, Riverside could be truly beautiful if it was landscaped right, if it was hydrated right.
Right.
We have beautiful mountains everywhere. San Bernardino's
I was like,
beautiful.
don't get me started on San Bernardino.
Yeah, it could be.
It could be gorgeous.
Southern California should be the most beautiful place on earth.
Absolutely.
It's just, there's no reason we shouldn't look like Palm Springs.
Right.
There's just no reason. But it's just a lot of garbage, a lot of trash, and a lot of poverty.
Yeah.
In heaven, there's no poverty. The new earth, there's nobody's poor anymore.
Right. Amen.
So.
Awesome.
Yeah, great,
Thank
Jennifer.
you. These are great questions. Thank you so much for checking out this episode. You can always submit your own questions by going to move.sc/ask or ask us there in the comments. Please let us know what you think. And or you can go to the Sandals Church app and ask us there. We're so grateful that you've listened. See you next time.
Thanks for checking out this episode. If you'd like to support this podcast, you can donate at sandalschurch.com/support. This podcast is a way for Pastor Matt Brown to answer your questions about topics like the Bible, God, relationships, and culture. Like Pastor Matt often says on the show, a podcast is not a pastor. If you'd like prayer or need to speak with someone about a specific situation you are going through, you can email us at help@sandalschurch.com. If you enjoy this podcast, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for being a Debrief listener.